Begin. Hi everyone, my name is Flora Solomon and welcome to By the Book. It's an interactive webinar brought to you by our co-hosts, cousins Peter, John, and Danny Bookvar. Peter is a CNBC contributor and CIO of Bleakley Advisory Group. John is Vice Chair of Neurosurgery at Lenox Hill Hospital, where he's investigator at the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research, directing the Lab for Brain Tumor Biology and Therapy. Danny, John's twin, is president at Thrasio, the largest acquirer of Amazon third-party private label businesses, and has 20 plus years of experience leading fast-growing consumer businesses for global brands, such as the NFL and Weight Watchers. Johnny, Danny, and Peter are all leaders in their respective fields and will be discussing health, wellness, the front line, business, and life with our special guests. Take it away, Peter.
I have just a quick disclosure before we begin. John and Dan are not affiliated with Bleakley Advisory Group and Private Advisor Group, and nothing they say should be taken as investment advice, and nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. And I'm going to hand it off to Dan.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Danny Bookvar, and thanks, Flora, for that intro. I'm president of Thrasio, former CEO of Circle Line Sightseeing, and president of the NFL Experience. I live on the Upper West Side with my wife of 22 years and 2 teenagers. John, over to you.
Thank you, guys. My name is Dr. John Bookvar. I'm sitting here on 77th between Lex and Park Avenue at Lenox Hill Hospital. And as I do every week, we're navigating sort of the tail end of this COVID crisis. And I'm happy to say that, for example, we had only 3 patients last night come through our emergency room with possible COVID-related illnesses. And one of our hospitals, Staten Island University Hospital, had for the first time no admissions last night for COVID. So in general, the outlook for this surge in COVID-related diseases is waning, and that's good news as we head into the warmer months. So that's just my quick update. I want to tell you that we have a very special episode today for me personally and professionally. And By the Book is honoring the late Charles Rob Roberts. And Charles' wife is here, Alice, and his 2 close colleagues, John Leone and Jared Cooper. And this is going to be a very positive show and really honor the life of a true American hero on this eve of Memorial Day. And we'll be asking and talking about some really positive, upbeat things from Rob's life and Alice's life. But we're going to start with really a moment of silence as we honor those who have fallen in protecting our country and giving the ultimate sacrifice like Rob did, with a video montage that his family put together. So I'm going to share the screen and play that now. Thank you for that, Jared and John, for making that. And so, Alice, you know, we've spent a lot of time together, you and I, virtually for the most part over the last 4 or 6 weeks. And obviously, as a physician practicing and helping take care of Rob, it's been a very, very challenging couple of weeks. But we've seen basically a national outpouring of love and support, both locally, obviously with your family, your community, all the way up to the government level. And why did that happen for Rob? Why do you think we've seen this national outpouring of love and honor for Rob? What was it about him that made this such a tragic event?
Well, I think the more talking to people, the more I realized that he made everyone feel at ease. He made everyone feel like they were valued. He made everyone feel like he was their good friend. And the more I hear from people, the more I learn about him. And we had spoken that you and I, that you can be married to someone for close to 20 years and not really know their public persona. And in this case, it's really mind blowing how many people liked him and felt valued by him. And I'm learning more every day that I never even knew, even though our town is so small. It's only 3 miles long and less than a mile wide.
So Jared, you and I have also talked quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. Just remind us how you know Rob. I know you're an attorney. How did you get to befriend a police officer like Rob? I hope it was for good reasons.
It was. So about 5 years ago, when my family and I moved to this very small town, as Alice said, I was out in the front and a squad car pulled up and it was Rob. And he said, "Hey, you're from Livingston, right? Livingston, New Jersey." And I said, "Yeah." He said, I heard there was another Livingston guy in town. Rob and I grew up in the same town in New Jersey, about 20 minutes from here. Didn't know each other at all. He was 5 years my senior. We missed each other in the schools, but we had some mutual friends, and he heard that there was another guy in town who probably needed an assist and a friendly face, and that started a beautiful friendship.
That's incredible. What do you think? We've seen obviously a lot of positives that have come out of your tiny town, and it's become sort of a model for how to handle, how to come together as a group. What have been some of the silver linings that you think towns across America should be looking at from Glen Ridge? Because whether it's in the New York Times or pictures on the internet, heck, this is a true American town that is treating an American hero on Memorial Day. This is what every town should be doing.
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer, except to tell you what I feel being a resident of this town. And again, I'm new to this town, 5 years new. John and Alice have been here a lot longer. Alice has been here her whole life. She can probably speak to that better than me. But I'll tell you, there's something about this town that everybody very much takes care of each other. And I said this to someone, John, it may have been you even. We knew it at the time, but we didn't understand it until we unfortunately lost him. But Rob was and still is, he was the center of this town. And we're all learning that now. Like I said, we subconsciously knew it then. Rob was everywhere in this town. And we're learning now, literally, he touched everyone somehow. The stories that we've all gotten to hear, which we thought were stories that we had between ourselves and Rob, we're now finding out that everybody had their story with Rob and their interaction with Rob. And he was involved in, the other word I come up with all the time is family. He was all about his family first and foremost, but there were so many other different families in Rob's life. There was his police force family. There was the children that he cared for in this town, and he was a school officer and a bike officer, and he was involved in all the school activities. The sports family, he was a coach for a lot of teams, and that's the word I would use, is family. This town is a family, and Rob was the patriarch of the family.
Just want to let you know that even the town of Glen Ridge sent Lenox Hill Hospital 1,000 meals one night to feed the entire healthcare staff, and then an additional 500 meals. So really the outpouring of love and support for us trying to help Rob was really unparalleled in anything I've ever seen in healthcare. A true testament to the love that he engendered in so many people. It's frankly inspiring.
Alice, I have a quick question before I ask it. Brad, I just wanted to welcome you. Brad Hoylman is a state senator from New York City. Thanks for joining us, Brad. We're gonna turn to you in a couple of minutes, but very much look forward to talking to you. Alice, what did what did Rob enjoy most about being a cop and being part of the Glen Ridge PD?
It was a job where he could always be moving, and it wasn't a desk job, and it was never that predictable. If crossing guards call out sick, a lot of them are senior citizens, he would have to cover their post. He was always on the move, and he always liked to be on the move. But the more I hear from people after his death, I think the thing he liked the most about being out on the street was to interact with people all day. And I mean, not every interaction in the police world is a positive one, but he made as many positive as he could, and that's what I'm hearing from people. People who've written to me and said, "I've always been afraid of cops, but your husband put me at ease," or "I don't usually like cops," or "I've had not a good past." He made you feel like you were valued and that you were cared for, and that he wouldn't judge you on any of your past whatever.
Alice, it sounds like with the beautiful kids that you had that I saw in that video, how are they doing? I mean, they must have only really positive memories of Rob, that at least while not enough time, there's a lot there that they can carry with them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Rob's job is, and all police officers, is he got time to spend with us. For example, he would do the pickups half the time at preschool because he would be off half the time. But that also meant that he was working half of the weekends we ever had together. So they spent a lot of time with him, but then I spent a lot of time with them, half the time, basically. But my son, I think, really said it all. He's 10, and he said when he knew Rob wasn't going to be coming home, he said, "I just really, really wish I had more than 10 years with him." And that really just sort of said it all. And my daughter, when Dr. Bookvar or any of the nurses would call my middle daughter, the 12-year-old, she had complete faith that he would get better. And she would actually block her ears because she didn't want to hear any somewhat negative reports. So she was holding out hope the whole time. I mean, we were all holding out hope, but she was more in denial of anything. So it's been hard for her. And what she said the other day, she is a pretty high emotional intelligence, I think. She said, a lot of people, when someone dies, they feel sorry for themselves, she said, but I really feel sorry for Dad because he's going to miss a lot. So that was really hard to hear because I think that's just how she's feeling. And then my eldest, it's funny, she's quieter. She used to always watch soccer with Rob, and he coached her too. She's about to be 16 in June. When you look at all the pictures we have, I noticed that she's always right next to him, and I think that speaks volumes too. She's always right next to him in every picture we have. So it's funny, with 3 kids, they're all very different, and they're all processing it very differently.
Alice, you mentioned to me you're a 4th grade teacher. I know you come from a long line of teachers as well. And on Memorial Day, you mentioned to me that you wanted to either write a book on Memorial Day or teach the children what Memorial Day is for the right reasons. Could you just remind me of what you said to me and why?
Sure. So I always thought every year, kids think of Memorial Day as this really, really fun time. The students do, it's time to kick off the summer and go to your beach house and go on a boat. But I always looked for a kid's book to show the kids the real meaning of Memorial Day. My mom's uncle had died in World War I, so I had always grown up knowing the real meaning of Memorial Day and, Decoration Day of the soldiers who had died. And in front of our school, the school was built in 1900. There's a war memorial that was built in the 20s after World War I. And, the kids play on it and never stop to think why it's there. So I try and make a point every year. There's etchings of the guys' names who died in World War I on the curved wall. And I try and make a point every year to take the kids out to the front lawn and say, does anyone know what this means? Does anyone know why this is here? And I show them old postcards. Actually, Rob bought me one on eBay of the school even before the wall was there, because the school was built in 1900. The Great War hadn't even happened yet. So I think it's really, really important to put in perspective in 4th grade minds just what Memorial Day is all about. And it's not really about having fun and kicking off the summer. And every year we have a parade in our town where they march and then they congregate in front of that wall. And this year I actually just learned they're going to do a very, very small virtual remembrance. So I'm glad to hear that, but it's supposed to be all virtual.
Alice, were you able to have a public funeral? I know with police officers, often they do. Was that allowed in Glenridge?
So they had they had an incredibly, I can't even describe it in words. You have to look at the videos from it. They had a procession with a private ceremony in front of town hall. It was beautiful. But then afterwards, they drove the route of the logger run our town holds every year in June, and Rob and I usually ran it. And they processed through the route so that people could pay their respects but do it safely. And I really, really wish I had video from me inside the car of the people paying respects to him, because that was like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, people were sobbing. They were putting their hands over their hearts. We had asked that they wear Mets gear. You saw Yankees fans with Mets gear on. Like, I've never seen anything like it.
Did I see a story of a Mets pitcher who called Rob while he was ill?
Yeah, it was Steven Matz. And what's funny is they said, oh, we were trying to get, I don't know, like Noah Syndergaard, but they got Steven Matz. But the funny thing was, he was the one last year. Gavin was dying for a ball at Citi Field, and my girls always get so mad because Gavin always gets lucky with free giveaways. And Steven Matz threw Gavin the ball. So they didn't know that at the time, but it's pretty cool just how everything is really interconnected. Everything. Even I have to say this about family and connectivity in towns. One of the nurses at Lenox Hill had heard that Rob had grown up in Livingston, and she had too, and we had that connection. And she would touch base with me pretty much every day or multiple times a day to tell me how well they were caring for Rob and how she would check in on him. We have a doctor in town who went and visited him because she's on the staff there. I mean, just anything anyone could do, they did, just to support Rob and just to support us.
Well, I can tell you on behalf of everyone here at Lenox Hill and Northwell, it was a really beautiful, it really helped us as healthcare providers to see that outpouring of love and support. And the feeling was mutual, Alice. In a very short period of time, you all became our family, and Rob is part of our family. So we mourn his loss, but we're so grateful. You are a rock, and you're an inspiration to us all. And we wish you and the kids and the entire town well. And thank you so much for being with us on Memorial Day. It is just extremely important to all of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to echo that. Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, thank you.
I just have to say that Dr. Bookvar believed in Rob, and that's just why, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm just eternally grateful to him. He believed in him and he gave it his all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thanks,
John and Jared, thank you both for joining. Feel free to stay with us for the next 15 minutes. We're going to now turn to Brad Hoylman. Welcome. Brad, you're a state senator from New York City. I don't think your district covers Lenox Hill, but you were first elected in 2012. You represent the 27th district in the New York State Senate area, covering Lower Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen, I think the East Village. You've served before that as general counsel of the Partnership for New York City, which is where you and I met. And you're a former president of the Gay and Lesbian Independent Democrats, former board member of the Empire State Pride Agenda, Tenants and Neighbors, Class Size Matters, Citizen Action. You've done it all, you've got it all, and it's great to have you here with us and great to see you again. And I think, you know, we're so happy to have you and really want to pivot from honoring Alice and the police force of Glenridge to talk about the FDNY and the NYPD and some of the first responders you've seen in the last 9 weeks, Brad, and honor and talk about stories of heroism, if you have any that are top of mind.
Yes, well, let me first say it's great to be here, and condolences, deepest condolences to you, Alice, and to your family. Obviously, as someone who reads the news in the region, I was really touched by the outpouring of support you had when your husband passed. And thank you, Dr. Burkhardt, for your help with the family. I actually do have a Lennox Hill outpost in my district. The Lennox Hill Healthplex is here in Greenwich Village, and I know Michael Dowling very well, who's the CEO of Northwell and is part of the governor's kind of inner circle as he grapples with this enormous crisis and how to handle it from a public health perspective, which is so important. I mean, you know, Danny, when I think about you know, essential workers, first responders, like Officer Roberts, you know, I think of my own precinct. You know, it's very local, and that seemed to be part of what was so captivating about, you know, why Officer Roberts was so beloved, because he seemed to have, you know, seemed to know everyone, and that's very true at the local precinct level here in the village. We have a fleet of officers who have, you know, I've known, you know, since before 9/11, who've been on the front lines, who know their neighbors, who come to community board meetings, who are aware of the seniors, who are dealing with a lot of problems and a lot of time-consuming issues. You know, a few months ago it was homelessness. Now it's dealing with the issue of social distancing and a lot of pressure from the advocates of police reform, and you know, officers need to know that elected officials like me have their back, because they're just trying to do their job, and a lot of the decisions about how they interact with the public are made at levels, you know, other than theirs. Let's put it that way. So I'm very supportive of my local precinct. They've helped me out numerous times on personal levels. When this federal administration was first elected, there were 2 swastikas scrawled into the elevator banks of the building where I live, and I reached out to my local precinct. It was a really atrocious hate crime, directed not at me personally, but I guess at everyone in our building. And they responded swiftly, and I felt very protected, even though in subsequent weeks I had received hate mail, vicious attacks on me and my family. And I just really have to thank the officers of the 6th for everything they do. And I think about how they put their lives on the line and how their families, like Alice, how she and her family loan them out to us, you know, on a daily basis. And oftentimes, you know, they must wonder if their husband or wife or partner are going to be coming home safely. I can't imagine the routine of that kind of uncertainty in a professional, you know, in a profession like being a police officer or a firefighter. And that's why every night at 7 p.m. here in New York City and across the state of New York and the country, you know, we get out our pots and pans, and I get out my megaphone and hang over my balustrade and shout my appreciation for the officers of the 6th Precinct and all the NYPD who protect us.
So do we, Brad. So do we. From the Upper West Side, in my case. Right. Quick follow-on question, and then Peter, John, follow me and fire away. Memorial Day, you know, usually for a guy like you, I presume, is honoring, you know, the lives lost for men and women in the armed services and attending parades. What does Monday look like for you now? Are there parades allowed? Certainly not in New York City, across the state.
Much more low key. Much more low key. It's a little sad and, you know, distant, which really defines this pandemic and why it's so cruel to so many families and individuals who feel isolated, and the lack of connection is heartbreaking, particularly when you're trying to, you know, attend a you know, a memorial service or a celebration like a parade. It's confusing for children and even adults. So I have to say, I'm going to be grappling with it. Usually we will lay a wreath at one of the Doughboy statues in Chelsea or the Village. We have these remarkable statues from World War I, one at Abington Square in the Village and one up in Chelsea on 27th Street. And it's a really solemn occasion. We usually do it on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, and we won't be able to do that. So I'm saddened, but I am heartened that the numbers are looking better. I mean, Dr. Brookvar can tell us that better than I, but the more capacity we get in our hospital system, thanks to the essential workers like Dr. Brookvar, who are now the first responders in addition to our NYPD, there is a glimmer of hope. And so I'm kind of propelling myself on that as we enter this Memorial Day weekend.
Peter, John?
Johnny muted.
Now that I know that you're in the Lenox Hill Greenwich Village area, so we talk about hospital closings quite a bit, and St. Vincent's Hospital closed, and now you have a pandemic. How did your area do without a major hospital that's been converted to a 24-hour ER? Did you obviously?
Well, it's the closing of St. Vincent's was painful. It was painful because, believe it or not, before it closed, there was a large community outcry when the hospital, which was still in existence then, tried to rebuild itself and create a more modern facility. And a lot of local neighbors objected to that. And many of those same local neighbors who objected to the hospital being rebuilt objected to the old one closing. So everyone has, multiple opinions apparently, and including a lot of my constituents. But I think nobody really thought an institution like St. Vincent's which was, over 125 years old, would be kind of on the chopping block like it was. But because of the recession and because of the hospital had not kept up with the times, and the need for hospital beds, was a fluid kind of dynamic, I think, among state health policy experts. Now I think we have to rethink that because, we see the scramble for beds that occurred, and the fact that, we opened up a convention center that should have had an auto, trade convention on its floors rather than respirators and ventilators and hospital beds. We had an entire Navy ship come to port because we had a lack of hospital beds. And we had a Christian missionary, I might say a controversial one, set up camp on Central Park too. So we need, I believe, rethink about the need for hospital beds. The truth is, though, as I'm sure you are aware, my district here in the Village and on the west side of Manhattan is not the hardest hit. Go north to Inwood, you go to the Bronx and Queens, that's where capacity has really been strained. And that's where I think a lot of health planning needs to be focused as we move forward. Of course, it runs parallel with, vulnerable populations, people who have been systematically underserved for decades in our city and state. It's, they're the same folks who are having the worst outcomes due to COVID-19.
Brad, I have a question on reopening the economy again. I know it's been a very delicate balance of wanting to revitalize the economy, but also obviously being cognizant of the health risks involved. New York City, because of its density, obviously got hit hard. It's much easier for a suburb to reopen just because it's more spread out. how did New York balance that? And I know come June, more things are going to be reopening. So how did that discussion go, and what's been the feedback from both people and businesses?
Well, the businesses are, on, on a knife's edge as to whether they'll survive. Many of them, particularly the smaller ones, have closed, particularly restaurants and bars. I don't know if we'll ever see them reopen. There've been, restaurants that have literally raised, families for generations. Like one a couple of blocks from me called Knickerbocker, a steakhouse that, where I was, spent the day after 9/11, and the whole community kind of convened in sorrow and comfort. I'm not sure if it's going to reopen. So this is a plan, though, that has to be based on science and health expertise. So I'm glad the governor has this, kind of these categories which are being driven by data, hospital capacity, the numbers of hospitalizations, deaths, intubations, and then we can look at whether the the surrounding areas are safe, and whether the numbers of infections have dropped sufficiently to open more businesses. But again, I feel hope as we head into Memorial Day weekend. The openings upstate that have occurred, will give us some sense as to how that goes. I worry about it, though. I worry about, the business component, because it really, drives a lot of employment. And in my office, that's what we've been dealing with 24/7, our unemployment insurance claims. We have over 900 active cases. You've got an unemployment rate that is, almost a quarter of the American population. And that's really daunting from a policy perspective, because that is going to impact our revenues in the state of New York, which looks like a deficit of anywhere from $15 to $17 billion. And that's going to determine whether we can keep the subway running, or have our, quality public schools, or the cultural and arts components that we're used to, and protect vulnerable people like homeless and seniors. So it really is a cascading effect that is very concerning.
Brad, I read yesterday, I think it was yesterday, about, and Alice, this is relevant to you, about establishing a presumption that COVID-19 is a work-related injury for first responders, so that they received, line of duty benefits, like I guess a legal presumption, and it was at the US Senate level. Does New York State have that? Are you working on anything like that?
We had a presumption in terms of death benefits for 9/11 first responders. I think it's something we'll look at for sure, but we are waiting to see how the federal government responds first. And again, it goes back to the revenue question. New York is broke. Let's just be candid about it. We were in a sorry shape before the pandemic hit, looking at a $10 billion deficit before we even had heard the words, coronavirus. And now with the pandemic and the economic slowdown, we're going to have to look to the federal government. The $3 trillion package that the House has passed is going to help us, get those resources to first responders. But if the federal government doesn't do it, New York's going to have to come up with a way to do it ourselves. And that's something we're looking at beginning next week as we head back up to Albany for the legislative session.
I've been
And Alice, yeah, I was going to ask Alice.
Yeah, I saw Cory Booker was, he and I can't remember the other, it's a bipartisan bill. It already went through the Senate, but now it's being discussed in the House, and that's the federal money. And we're really hopeful that that will go through, because that helps families of first responders not have to argue that it was indeed contracted while at work. So I'm really hopeful. I'm really hoping that that will proceed the way it should.
And Mayor de Blasio has come out in support of those kind of line of duty benefits. And we have a bill at the state level introduced by Assemblymember Peter Bothay. But I think we're going to pull the trigger on that. We're just going to see what the feds do first. I believe is probably the approach my colleagues will take.
I have a question, and Brad, in all fairness, we generally avoid deeply political topics. But I do want to talk, Johnny, about the blood shortage, and then Brad, I think I read you gave blood yesterday or tried to. Johnny, do you have any data on the blood shortage that we're experiencing?
Well, for the last 6 weeks or so, we've been there have been nobody donating blood because they were afraid to go to blood centers. In fact, the New York blood centers were closed for many weeks at a time. And so fortunately, we had shut down surgeries, which are a big time when we need blood supplies. And frankly, there has been an uptick now in people who are going and donating blood. But that was at a critical shortage, and I think continues to be at a critical shortage. So we are urging people to give blood. Everyone is giving plasma now after recovering from COVID, but actually convalescent plasma, although is being touted as effective for the treatment of COVID, there's actually no significant data to support that it works at this time. Frankly, we much rather you give blood where we know it's going to save a life.
Do you know if they're lessening the requirements? Because, for example, I tried to give blood once and I had thyroid cancer, so they didn't want it. So are they reducing the requirements for someone to do that?
I'm not sure about that. And thyroid cancer is always one of those issues because, it doesn't impact your longevity or your life, for example, a papillary thyroid carcinoma or something like that. So I frankly don't know the answer to that, but I'm happy to have our team look at that and get back to you.
Brad, you may know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I know about the blood shortage. We were talking to the blood center. Usually they get about 10,000 donations in a typical month. The past month they've had less than 2,000. So it's a matter of a lot of blood drives being canceled. I think they've only had 2 in the last couple of months, and they usually have dozens. And what has been frustrating is there's been a ban on gay and bisexual men from donating blood due to concerns about HIV/AIDS, presumably that date back 30 years. Even though blood can be screened effectively and rather efficiently, is my understanding, that ban in effect still exists. So we're trying to push the FDA to revisit those guidelines. They have narrowed the restrictions from a year to 3 months that you have to wait to be sexually active in order to donate blood if you're gay or bisexual. I think science shows that those kinds of restrictions should be eliminated altogether, and certainly the need exists, as you pointed out, for these types of donations. So, let's see what the FDA does in the next few months as we power through this pandemic.
On a somewhat lighter note, and we can probably wrap up with this, I also read yesterday that you're proposing an extension with the state liquor authority that's going to allow takeout and delivery of not just beer, but a hard alcohol, which is good news for us in the city. So I can go to the local restaurant, get an old fashioned in a paper cup, and then walk away and not get arrested.
Yes. And I should note that it's actually 5 o'clock right now. So
good.
We're officially in the tail hour Friday before Memorial Day. But, a lot of these small businesses, the restaurants and bars in my district on the Upper West Side, as you know, Danny, and across the city are struggling to stay open. Many of them have closed, as I've as I just commented earlier to Peter, we got to give them a lifeline, and the governor's executive order was that, but we need to extend it beyond the end of the crisis after the state of emergency is declared over. I'm proposing in this bill to give bars and restaurants 2 additional years to provide, beer, wine, and other spirits to go. And I think that's going to allow them that additional amount of revenue to stay open, and gives New Yorkers, a little bit of hope during this relatively dark period that we're going to get through this. So I'm excited about the legislation. I've had a really positive response, not just from restaurant and bar owners, but from just a lot of constituents who feel like, this is something that we can do for our small businesses.
Well, that's great. I think it is unless John and Peter, you disagree, I think that's a fitting way to end. It is 5 o'clock. It's time for a cocktail. I just want to thank Alice and Jared and John for honoring Alice, your husband, Rob, and that was just a beautiful tribute. So nice to have you. And Brad, thanks for ending your week with us and honoring the first responders and talking about New York State and New York City with us. So thank you, everyone. Happy Memorial Day, and see everyone next week on By the Book. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.